cell phone on, please make sure that it's silenced or turned off.
I'm trying.
We're excited to have you here. We have books for sale at the registers. Please consider making a purchase from Book Soup tonight. Your patronage keeps our doors open and we greatly appreciate it. We are excited to have writer, director, and producer Tom Folsom here tonight. He's going to talk about his new biography of Dennis Hopper.
Woo! Woo!
Woo! Thank you. Here's Tom.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. This is just incredible to read for all of you, half of who knew Dennis and are in the book. So I'm just going to launch in, and then we're going to sort of stagger this out, little questions, but let's jump in. Okay. This is the opening chapter. It's titled Kansas. Dennis Hopper lit up a cigarette in the rich Peruvian night. Clean-cut and wiry, with more than a hint of disrepute, this handsome gentleman wore a Stetson hat as he barreled down the far side of the acid-green Andes, deftly maneuvering the plummeting hairpin turns in his muddy red Ford pickup truck. Emblazoned on the side was his personal slogan, Kansas, Hollywood, California, broken bones but raring to go. Sitting shotgun, a journalist from Life was hungry for the inside scoop for a major cover story about what this wild-eyed actor, suddenly known around the globe as the chopper-riding, hell-raising LSD freak behind the phenomenally successful Easy Rider, was doing in a remote corner of the world, coked up like a maniac and surrounded by a pack of psychedelic cowboys who considered him a genius, or some sort of messiah. At the beatific age of 33, Hopper had built in a mountain as if to ring in the new decade of the 70s, a curious world of which only he seemed to know the true meaning. It lay 14,000 feet above sea level in the ancient village of Chincheros, which was populated by native Quechua Indians who had little clue as to what was going on in his head. Centuries before, they'd been overrun by conquistadors. Now came Hopper, transforming their village practically overnight into a Wild West frontier town. He had herds of horses and saddles hauled up the mountain. He flew in burly men to be dressed in a variety of cowboy get-ups. He dragged Western movie sets up the mountain path, including a sort of spiritualist temple called Jimmy's Place with the saying, "Reminds you of your destiny," painted on the window. So what the devil did it mean? The journalist held on for dear life as Hopper launched into his story, a strange and twisted tale full of superhero lies and decadent lows. It all began rather innocently in Dodge City, Kansas, just around the time the Dust Bowl was settling down. Back in its rip-roaring heyday, dime store books around the globe branded Dodge City, the wickedest city in America, the end of the trail for herds of cowboys ready to raise hell after bringing longhorn cattle from Texas, and trouble to boot. It took the quickest guns in the West to keep the peace, including the legendary heroes of the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, Wyatt Earp and his tubercular sidekick, Doc Holliday. What the law didn't chase off, the dust certainly did by the time Hopper's tale began. On a bright Saturday morning in April 1939, the old cowtown proudly dragged out its boots and did its best to look its wildest worst. The Junior Chamber of Commerce had issued a bulletin stating, "Keep your whiskers," and offered a $200 prize for the best beer, one that harkened back to those woolly days at Old Dodge. Everybody came out for the big day, including the Hopper family. Barely 3 years old, Dennis watched in amazement the shaggy wild men draped in buffalo skins, looming over dapper dudes in handlebar mustaches. They all took their places like extras outside the railway station alongside a cast of tens of thousands from across the country, desperate for a bit of color after years of suffering under the sun-blotted blackness of the dust storms. The seconds ticked toward the arrival of the actors. The town would ever afterward remember the premiere of Dodge City the movie as the biggest thing to happen to Dodge, shadowing even its storied past. Shortly after 10 o'clock, 30 barnstormers from the Wichita Aeronautic Society ripped through the skies. The band struck up "O Susanna" as a steel blue Warner Brothers special chugged in on the tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad. Out from the extravagant 17-car train, which included 8 luxury Pullmans, stepped a curiosity cabinet of Hollywood's most wanted, like Humphrey Bogart, and some unwanted, like the exotic Lies who sucked the alabaster toe of a Venus statue in the surrealist film masterpiece Lodge Door. The punch-drunk former light heavyweight champion of the world, Slapsy Maxie Rosenblum, stumbled out of the baggage car to look like the Lady Gay Saloon, The infamous watering hole, the bibulous Babylon of the western frontier, as Dodge said he was known before it turned dry as a bone. A collection of B-movie sharpshooters burst forth into the light, Hoot Gibson and Buck Jones in his white 10-gallon hat. Buck's trusty horse Silver pranced out of the animal car. Murmurs passed between mother and grandmother. Would he really come all the way from California to see them? At last, the star with a slick, pencil-thin mustache appeared on the platform with the roar of his fans. "I remember Errol Flynn came to Dodge City," said Hopper, telling a story he would repeat to friends and journalists throughout his life. "That was big time." Starring in Hopper's earliest memory, the swashbucking Hollywood libertine flashed a blazing smile to the throngs of young girls flushed with excitement, waving like crazy from the sidelines, clamoring for his attention, and held back only by the efforts of 6 companies of National Guardsmen. One day when Dennis was all grown up, he too might roll through town in a fringed buckskin jacket, high on his steed. Straddling a white horse strapped with a $25,000 hand-tool black and silver saddle commissioned by the Santa Fe Railroad, Errol Flynn led the parade, trailed by a procession of covered wagons, 25 corn-fed children on Shetland ponies, unicyclists in derby hats, and dignitaries, including 3 governors, Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr., and the newly crowned cowgirl queen, Miss Mary Jean Frankenberger, a freshman at Dodge City Junior College. Miss Mary had her white boots on. West of Chicago, there was no law. West of Dodge City, there was no God. At the Dodge Theater, the town's ornate movie palace lit up by marquee light bulbs, Dodge City depicted the coming of the Santa Fe Railroad, the frontier outpost, setting the stage for hordes of bad guys just itching to be shot down by Errol Flynn playing the lone cowboy. All night at the Dodge, grinding out shows till dawn, the trailblazing hero rode into the sunset again and again with his girl on shotgun, Rosie Olivia de Havilland. By sundown, having triumphantly resurrected the long-lost glory days of Dodge, the real Errol Flynn chugged out of the station with the key to the city in hand. Going with him were Hoot and Buck, and even Trusty Silver, riding off in the animal car. "And anyway, they came there," said Hopper of those movie cowboys, offering a hint as to why he turned out the way he did. "That probably had a lot to do with me eventually wanting to be an actor, I think." Not a single cowboy could be found roaming the lone, dusty streets come Monday morning as life resumed in Dodge City, population 9,000, just yesterday brimming with 10-gallon hats, now emptied out like an abandoned movie set. Brandishing his silver cat pistols, little Dennis played shoot-'em-up against the older boy who lived across the street from his grandpa Hopper. One of them had to be Indian, one of them had to be cowboy. Looking back to his trike-riding Hellraiser playmate with a pint-sized straw hat, Leonard Fowler remembered, Dennis wanted to be cowboy most of the time. Well, that's my opening of the book, and, it's one of these things where I really wanted to imagine, I think this is a sort of rosebud moment, the day that Errol Flynn comes to town on his white horse striding through Dodge City, and you can just imagine what little Dennis, 3 years old, is sort of coming to consciousness, and he looks around and he sees, wow, Dodge City is filled with these cowboys. Who are they? And then the next day they're all gone, and well, why wouldn't you want to chase them? You know what I mean? And I kind of feel this is what set Dennis off on his journey. I want to be one of those cowboys. Well, would you guys like to ask some questions real quick? Because I want to kind of roll through this chapter, and we're going to sort of stagger it, but let's get into it.
Question. Do we know if Dennis ever met Errol Flynn later?
Yeah, I actually don't know if he met Errol Flynn. I know that Dean Stockwell, of course, did, because Dean was... well, it's sort of a lewd story, but I'm going to tell it because we're all adults here. Dean Stockwell was a child actor, of course, and so he meets Errol Flynn, and Errol Flynn gives him this pin, and it looks like sort of like an aviator pin, and then he gives this to young Dean. Dean's like, wow, this is pretty neat. I'm getting this from Errol Flynn. He goes, we were part of the club, and so the idea is that it's you turn this thing around, and it's like 3 F's, and it's sort of interlocked in kind of sort of a cock and balls. And he says, well, this is you're part of Flynn's Flying Fuckers. So yeah,
That worked out.
if you never met Errol Flynn, I think he's sort of what's like that kind of weird, that Blue Velvet, what is it? Twin Peaks. There's that character named Bob or something like that. He's sort of the spirit that sort of jumps from one guy to the next. And I think there was some sort of transference there between Errol Flynn and Hopper. And kind of just happened. So, you know, I think as you all know, as you know, some of the new Dennis, you got to spend some time making some sort of cosmic connections, you know. I never did want to write like a typical Hollywood biography, and that's luckily I got Dennis as a subject because he didn't really lend himself to that. But you know, I figured, okay, well, how am I going to do this? I mean, I came to this story having written gangster books before, nonfiction crime books about sort of larger than life New York City gangster pictures. Now, well, of course, Dennis was no gangster, but there was something about that outlaw quality that was like, okay, I can bring this to the story. So I started from that, and then just the deeper I got into it, I think really, you know, and I was able to talk to a lot of you, and you gave me some really wonderful interviews and just insights that it just was when I was starting out at the project. So I was really lucky to have, you know, really just terrific interviews by people who didn't really care to, you know, softball it. You know, they wanted their story to be told, and they had something to say about Dennis, you know, and I was lucky to be able to get that. But what I did do is I did move to Taos, New Mexico, because I sort of felt that the story was there about what really made Dennis Dennis. You know, that's where he was buried, of course. So there was something that must have been special to him. So, you know, as fate had it, I was able to get, it just so happened that they had one extra space because someone had just left, you know, the week before, of this thing called the Wurlitzer Foundation in Taos. And so we'll put you up for 3 months. So I was able to I just went and just not only just collected stories, but, you know, I try to just, you know, sink in there. And, you know, you're talking about stories that, well, you know, I talked to someone that said she was sort of known to have visions, and this is at the end of the book. But she said that when Dennis was being lowered into the grave, and you have the motorcycles, you know, giving the big salute, she said that she saw Dennis's spirit like riding out from the grave on a Harley Davidson. Well, I mean, you know, these are certain. Is this fact checkable? I mean, how do you fact check a dream? But you know, you do, like, this was the people that loved him, and so I, you know, it just came into it, like, you know, I tried to get into it. And so, you know, this is why I picked the epigraph from Christopherson, who wrote The Pilgrim about Dennis. You know, he's a walking contradiction, partly truth, partly fiction. And he sort of was this magical guy that sort of lived between reality and on the screen. And this is nice segue to my next section of reading, and then we'll stop again. Okay, I'm gonna have a little water real quick. Jump in. All right, let's go. Like when I was little, I lived on a farm near Dodge City, Kansas, continued Hopper in his peculiar high-pitched twang, roaring down the mountain and jumping ahead in his tale for the life journalist. Wheat fields all around, as far as you can see. No neighbors, no kids, just a train that came through once a day. A farm-raised runt, he would lie in a ditch at his grandparents' as the wind rustled and the Kansas sky loomed before him. By his side was his trusty dog with a spot around his eye. The tracks of the Santa Fe Railroad split the weathered farmhouse from the wheat field, spreading west as far as he could see. Chugging furiously, the train roared past, leaving nothing else for Dennis to do but pick himself up out of the ditch and poke around the dirt with a stick. Filling his lonely world with collections of butterflies and stamps from faraway places, occasionally cleaned out the chicken house. I watched more than anything else, said Hopper. He spent most of his hours wondering where the train came from and went. Where had the train taken all those cowboys? The confusing question had yet to be answered as Nellie tucked her grandson into bed. Lightning bugs faded away in a mason jar. Off in the distance, storms flashed like blue veins on a giant's temple. Dennis had come to live at the egg ranch shortly before his 6th birthday after World War II blew in like a mean sou'wester and swept his father away from Dodge. With his mother busy at the pool, the family would say without much further comment. Nellie took him in. Fixing lunch in a white clapboard farmhouse like Annie Ends in The Wizard of Oz, she had kept an eye out as Dennis roamed the alfalfa patch on a Shetland pony given to him by his grandpa. Lonnie even bought him home a sheepdog from the Clutter family, doomed to be brutally murdered by drifters as depicted in Truman Capote's Blood. Hard at work in his bib overalls on a wheat field out in Garden City, some 60 miles away, Lonnie left Nellie to raise Dennis and his baby brother, David, along with tending to the coop. The family thought it was too much for the old woman, but Nellie came from rugged stock. Long ago, one Mattie Masters McIntyre bumped along in a covered wagon to Kansas. Reading her Bible every Sunday, Mattie prayed her daughter might witness more than hardship. She even named her after the famous globe-trotting newspaper girl Nellie Bly, who beat the record set in Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. Well, little Nellie Bly McIntyre didn't grow up to see alligators in Port Said or lush tennis courts in Hong Kong, but she did grow up to see the grasshopper plague and the jackrabbit invasion that forced the townspeople to go on roundups, pounding out the rampant bunny problem with clubs so as not to waste bullets. And the black blizzard of 35, when the apocalyptic face of Jesus Christ appeared in a dust storm over the baseball diamond like the second coming. Yes, Nellie managed to see a few things through 20-mile-an-hour winds that sucked dust from the rutted fields and pummeled the egg ranch. It seemed the sun might never shine again, but when it finally did, the dull gray light revealed a weathered old farmhouse with no color at all. Then one May day in 1936, screaming in the distance, the super chief roared past, splashing his brilliant war bonnet colors of red and yellow onto the egg ranch. Tearing through the southwest, touching speeds of 108 miles an hour, going faster than any train before, the brand new transcontinental flyer continued its inaugural journey to the Pacific. This train of the stars, as the honchos of the Santa Fe Railroad dubbed it, catered to Hollywood big shots ready to discover the next big thing. The egg ranch was just another blip on their juggernaut journey, but one day those big shots would be staring at Dennis, who knew nothing of what on inside their luxurious sleeper cars named Taos, and nothing of their dirty dealings on the Navajo rugs with those aspiring Errol Flynns. But the boy was destined for greatness. Nothing could keep Dennis from lying in the ditch with his dog, waiting for the train. Nellie was so poor she had to make his shirts out of gingham chicken feed sacks, but she gathered eggs from the coop so they'd have money to go to the movies. Yeah, I made that connection one night. I was looking at, what's up with the super chief? Because, Amtrak to me sounds like the most disgusting way to spend a few hours, but this is the Amtrak of my day, of not, the days of the great, passenger trains, transcontinental. So I was like looking at this idea of, because you've just had this big scene with Errol Flynn in Dodge City, and it's just, wow, it's coming. All of a sudden you have this train coming, and it's got like all this fanfare when it leaves from Chicago, and it's going all the way to Los Angeles. It's called the Train of the Stars. And so it goes out to Los Angeles, and it's coming back, and the same day it's coming back is when Dennis is born. So, it just seems like, writers just eat this stuff up, because you're just like, oh God, like, I've unlocked the secret. This is the rosebud. That's the rosebud. I thought it was something else, but this is it. It's all sort of rose. It's just the whole rose. I'm not trying to, I don't know what it is. But anyway, put it down, and let's go, man. Let's hop on that speeding train. That's right. And what I thought was really cool about Dennis's story, it's so cinematic, and I think that, my job, I felt as a writer, wasn't to be like, well, let Dennis tell his story, and then I have to say, well, no, I mean, he embellished this part, I mean, that's not it, I guess that's one way to do it, but it sounds awfully boring, like something off, like, I don't know, like CNN, like, Spin Central, like, is this right, or, yes, thumbs up, I mean, how do you quantify things like that? He told these stories, for a reason. These are the stories he told over and over and over. They're really personal to him, and I think in some ways, I believe that the greatest role he ever played was his own. And the greatest movie he ever starred in was this movie of his life. And these are the stories in the movie of his life. And I wanted to put those stories together and make that movie. So, hope I did it. Okay. Let's finish out this chapter and we'll go to good Q&As. Okay. In singing cowboy matinees at the Dodge Theater, Gene Autry yodeled to the delight of the grannies, making them swoon. Against the backdrop murals of powder blue sky and fake cacti, Autry shot it out with 6 guns for the motherless little dogies hooting in the balcony with a sack of chocolates from Duck Walls, the 5 and dime. Opening on the singing band, guns and guitars, and Public Cowboy #1, the red velvet curtain swooshed close on the promise of unending adventure with the hero riding off on Champion, his horse, followed by his partner, Frog, with a floppy hat. Entranced by the light that projected the movies, piercing the dust and darkness, Dennis had the strangest thought a boy ever had, and it led him to the heights of fame and the most debauched states. "I was about 5, said Hopper to the journalist as he careened down a precarious stretch of Peruvian track. "My grandmother put some eggs in her apron, and we walked 5 miles to town, and she sold the eggs and took me to my first movie. And right away it hit me. The places I was seeing on the screen were the places the train came from and went to. The world on the screen was the real world, and I felt as if my heart would explode. I wanted so much to be a part of it." Holding on for dear life, the journalist took note. It was hard to pin down what all this madness on the mountain actually meant to Hopper, but it seemed to be the ultimate incarnation of his lifelong pursuit of the American dream. It wasn't the Horatio Alger up by the bootstraps variety they tried to teach him at stinking Lincoln Elementary. It was something far more fantastic he'd been chasing like the ragged tail of a shooting star ever since he was a little boy on a 12-acre egg ranch across from the railroad tracks. He'd go far and wide to find it, even if it took him to the furthest reaches of the Peruvian Andes. Unveiled to America on the cover of Life in 1970, Dennis Hopper smiled in a black cowboy hat, wearing a bolo tie and a shit-eating grin, holding a football in the crook of his arm and twirling a dandelion. The ensuing page is told of a raving madman riding around his private, drug-crazed world in darkest Peru, a world that included whipping parties, and one inexplicable instance of a woman chained to a porch post, Joan of Arc fashion, with fire crackling at her feet. The whole tale seemed completely too insane for readers to zero in on a single nostalgic childhood detail. But one Ruth Baker, still in Dodge City, long after her famous second cousin flew the coop, was quick to point out the crack. "Well, Nellie sold eggs," clarified Cousin Ruth. "But the story about her bringing them in an apron to walk to Dodge, that's not true. That wasn't Aunt Nellie. She'd do lots of things, but she'd never bring eggs in an apron to Dodge. That's quite a walk." Perhaps Dennis had appropriated for himself the opening scene from The Wizard of Oz when, after the 3 roars of NGN's Leo the Lion, Annie M fills her apron with eggs in a sepia-toned Kansas. At some point, it ceased to matter whether it was a real memory or a movie memory. Hopper probably couldn't tell the difference anymore as he looked back with a head full of visions paid for by golden eggs. Aiming the weapon of choice of his favorite cowboy, Red Riders, played by Wild Bill Elliott. "He didn't sing and dress and all that glittery stuff," said Hopper. "He was just a cowboy." The little dude fired BBs at the black-clad desperados lurking in the wheat fields. Lying in wait for the train and staring above those fields, Dennis no longer saw the blank screen of a Kansas sky. Instead, he projected a panorama of Technicolor mountains, the kind they put in King of Dodge City or Vigilantes of Dodge City, which really are nowhere to be found in the town's flat reality. Dennis desperately wanted to go to this fantastical land of the movies, bursting with singing cowboys beckoning him to adventure. But unlike the Twister to Oz, the Super Chief left him in the ditch with his dog on its way to his American dream. That Wizard of Oz thing. We were actually, my wife Lily and I, we were a friend of ours, and he sort of tends to, partake in a lot of illegal substances, although we didn't. But we were sort of watching, which you're supposed to do in sort of a, marijuana altered state, which is, we put on Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, and we watched The Wizard of Oz, because we were like, is this thing really going to work? So, and I was like sort of wrestling with Mr. Hopper here, as I've sort of been for the past 3 years. And so we're watching this thing, and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon is going, and all of a sudden, you know, like, wow, what's Annie M doing? And Lily's like, she's putting eggs in her apron. And I'm like, oh my word. So, you know, what I thought was pretty cool, and this is sort of goes back to what I was saying about, you know, Hopper's, he's telling the you know, the movie of his life. You know, a couple months after, I found out that the Annie M thing. I went to Seattle and I interviewed Stuart Stern, who is about, you know, he's in his mid-80s. He's a really magical guy. And Stuart Stern not only wrote Rebel Without a Cause, which was Hopper's first film, he wrote The Last Movie. You know, and Stuart was really, he still did about, you know, The Last Movie. I mean, he had his vision, and I think Dennis had his, and you know, Stuart was like, well, you know, he's really wrestling with that, you know, The Last Movie, you know, because that was going to be Stuart's masterpiece, and he said it's Hopper's masterpiece, which is an entirely different thing altogether. But you know, he did say, and he was sort of, I don't know, he was a little haunted, I think. I mean, he can't speak for someone else, but he was so soulful, so this must have really affected him. But he said, you know, he never did the movie I really wanted him to do, and that was growing up on the egg ranch with his grandma. So, I thought that was something. Anyway.
Oh, that would be good.
So, you guys want to talk or do some questions? Go ahead.
So, what was your? Did you have any personal relationship with Dennis previous?
I didn't at all. How I came to the project was, you know, I knew he just had this great story, and you know, but I was like, I don't really know. I don't know anything about Hollywood. I don't know. So, but then I kept on coming back to it, and I was like, God, that's a good story. How am I, you know, could I do this? And so I put out some inquiries in sort of the lit world, and I got some answers back, and they were like, well, you know, he's been working on, you know, he was working on a memoir, and it didn't work out, but, you know, maybe you talk to his you know, the guy, his literary agent. So I did. I mean, I was almost thinking, you know, if he's got some, you know, I believed in his story, and I was like, if he's got something on paper, like, I would like to help him finish it, you know, because he'd been in the news a lot because he was sick, and I was like, you know, this story needs to get out. So he, you know, as it turned out, they'd been trying to do several books over, you know, like 30-something years, and really nothing had come of it. So So I sort of worked with him, and I was like, okay, I want to do a book. I'm just going to start from scratch, and so that's how this came about.
Did you ever see his were they Dennis's some like notes he had put together to start a memoir?
It just really wasn't, you know, maybe he had something I never saw, but, you know, there was, you know, to really, you know, there's like scribbling notes, and then there's like, you know, a work in progress, which is two very different things. And there was no work in progress. So I started from scratch.
Did you interview Peter Fonda?
I did interview Peter Fonda. It was, you know, about a 4-hour sort of sit down at the Beverly Wilshire with a little tequila, and he was great. I mean, he was really honest about, you know, what I felt about their friendship, because it didn't turn out so well for those guys. But I don't know. I mean, you know, only Peter can really, you know, speak for Peter. But I do quote him here in the book, and I guess my sense is that, okay, I mean, you have two kids who, they've been talking about, wow, we're gonna make a movie, and it's exciting, and, you know, this is sort of, you know, they try and start making a movie around like 66 or so, and, you know, they go through, you know, one thing, it doesn't quite work, they're on this sort of journey, like, we've got to make a movie, and all of a sudden they get a chance to make this movie, and they go down to New Orleans with, you know, I mean, Peter's sort of he's a bit of a countercultural star at the time, because he was just in the Wild Angels and the Trip, so he's got his own cachet, you know, but he's still, you know, a little, you know, left of center. So, you know, and he and Hopper go down, and with some guys with 16mm cameras, and they go to New Orleans in Mardi Gras, and they're going to shoot a film like in Mardi Gras. It was just like, it sounds like a total disaster. And the shoot actually did seem like a total disaster too. But you know, I felt that Dennis was like, he was sort of riding this madness, like some sort of, you know, like it was a bucking bronco. And he really like made that thing, I thought, sort of magic. I mean, I don't think that, you know, like just movies today, like everything was so, you know, if you want a little grit, you could just sort of put that in After Effects, you know, in post-production. And so I felt that, you know, I mean, and people have told me, I mean, like, you know, people sort of seem to dismiss Dennis as being a real force behind Easy Rider, which is, I think, a real mistake. I mean, it's Dennis's spirit that's in that movie that I think that really tips it over the edge and makes it like a classic, as opposed to just some other motorcycle movie that's been forgotten, and you have to sort of, you know, Netflix it if you're, you know, really. But anyway, so like, just imagine. I mean, it's sort of like, I feel, it's, you know, Dennis was a big fan of, you know, B. Travin and Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and I kind of equate it in my mind like, you know, these, you know, these guys go out and they try and find gold, but the question is what happens when you strike it, you know? And so these guys struck gold. I mean, you make $40 million off of a $300,000 movie, you know, I don't know. I mean, you know, that didn't help their friendship, you know? So it's who knows what the details are, you know, of like, there's some sort of talk about like there's points of like he should have gotten this points and this points, and but I think you know, when you have a feud like that, it goes to something deeper. You know, it's not just about, you know, money. It's I mean, who knows? You have to really put yourself in their position, I think. But you know, he was really generous, so I was able to, you know, get his story.
Where do you fit Terry Southern into that equation? Because he
Yeah.
was I mean, he'd already written Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah,
So he was no like.
totally.
He was a heavy. How's he fit into this? Because
Well, I think
in fact, I just read somewhere. I thought it was an interview with you, but maybe it wasn't. I just read recently that the Mardi Gras
yeah.
thing was scripted.
Yeah, no, I wrote that. Okay, so then, yeah, that's what, like, and that's sort of, you know, that's my beef with Dennis, is that I don't think he wrote, his stories, like, I wrote all Easy Rider, and, like, there are people that will swear by it. But, like, you know, I went to the New York Public Library, and I got the Terry Southern papers, and, you know, there's a big sort of rigmarole in the New Yorker, sort of around '96, about this issue of who wrote Easy Rider, and they sort of focused on one thing, which was like, yeah, there is a shooting script of Easy Rider, but then there's also, you know, there's also another script, like a fragment of a script, and it scripts New Orleans, okay? And this either was like sort of done like in the heat of New Orleans or like slightly before, but there was a script. I mean, they're talking about, this is like raw pages, but it's like, it's scripted. So, you know, I think what Dennis did was he, you know, as I can piece it together, I mean, and this is what people have told me, I mean, they're working for that improvisational feeling to make it seem like, wow, this is all madness. It's not, you know, just, it's still like, it's still pretty out there, but like, you know, like this stuff about like Peter Fonda wandering through the streets and, you know, lifting up, you know, his girl of the night and, you know, sort of kissing her, which is, you know, just, you see it right there in the film. So that really surprised me, and this actually goes, the script goes all the way through the end where they actually say we blew it. So there's a lot of like disputes, I think, of like who wrote that enigmatic line. Was it Hopper or this? And you never know, because they definitely did collaborate on this thing. But to say that Terry Southern had nothing really to do with Easy Rider except for the title, I just think it's wrong. I think stylistically too, being a fan of his work, I think if you go and you check out just Terry, you know, if you're a fan of Terry, like you look at the stuff about the Venusian scenes where they're smoking pot and they're talking about, you know, they're coming, man, they're like they're among us, and that whole, it's like great. I mean, that seems like very Terry Southern. So, you know, he was definitely, I think, he's part of the mix. You can't get a guy like Terry Southern and like just say, well, he was just sort of out of it. You know, I'd see the memos that he'd written, you know, sort of back and forth in the creative process, and he's like, the guy's totally lucid, and he's like, right, you know, this is, this should be done like this. This should be done like this. You know, he's on his game. I mean, you know, the guy liked to drink when he's, you know, apparently he's a big martini man, as I've heard. But like, you know, what does that have to do with anything? You know, he's I think he's part of the mix, and I hope that the book sort of helps set that record straight a bit about Terry Southern's, you know, involvement in Easy Rider, because, you know, it wouldn't have been Easy Rider without Terry Southern, as far as I can
I
think
agree, but
together.
you know, I think there's another side to it, which is what it speaks to, actually, too, is Dennis is a great director.
Yeah,
Because if
totally.
everyone thought that was improvised,
Yeah.
and Terry Southern wrote it,
Yeah.
well, who's the great director?
Totally.
You know, wow,
Yeah.
that looks really, you know, so that does speak to Dennis's talent there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and also, you know, the writing in Easy, I mean, so many great things about Easy Rider. It's like, to me, it's, I mean, the writing, yeah, it's great. There's a lot of great writing in it. But it's also just like, you know, it's Dennis's thing. He's like, he says he invented MTV, but it's like the idea of just these guys, like these long passages, like riding around to Jimi Hendrix. I mean, just get into it.
Yeah.
And it like, I mean, to me, I was just thinking about that scene where, like, after New Orleans, and they're both riding, and they're playing that Dylan song, you know, the It's Alright Mom, Only Bleeding. And it's just, it's wow, you know. Like, it's not writing. I mean, yeah, maybe it's not the writing that makes that scene great. It's like, this thing is just, it's directed so well, you know. So I think it's totally right, you know.
I have a question about Easy Rider. Did Henry Jaglom?
Henry's involvement in Easy Rider was that he was part of the editing process.
He was?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was.
Because I never knew that. I just found that out when you
Yeah.
told me.
Yeah, you know,
I
he
never
was.
knew it.
Apparently, he edited a lot of like Nicholson scenes. You know,
Yeah.
I think, you know, from what I gather, I mean, like Easy Rider was a really long sort of. You know, he wanted to be like 2001, you know, Hopper. It was like, whoa, man. So they like really shortened a lot of he and Fauna. They sort of expanded Jack there a bit in the editing. But Henry was like, you know, he said that whatever you hear about, like, you know, yeah, Dennis, like, he would grumble some of the editing, but yeah, he was down with it. I mean, he was like, this is good. He wasn't like, you know, from what I gather from him, he wasn't like fighting that, like, no, it's got to be this, it's got to be this. I mean, I'm sure he was doing that too,
Yeah.
but like finally he's like, yeah, this is cool, I dig this.
Yeah.
And he said that, like, Henry's saying too, it's just like, you know, he felt that, he said it's Dennis's movie, like, in spirit. It's like anyone that, you know, says it's not, it's just wrong. It really is it's his. I mean, I don't know, you know, it's a collaborative process too. I'm not here to judge, like, you know,
No, it definitely is.
who's that, but that's sort of my, you know, this
There's
is what
a
I
head-
picked up
There's a
from.
number one.
Yeah, you gotta have a
Sorry,
director.
yeah.
I mean, these things just don't happen. I mean, I kind of disagree with, who was it? It was Buck Henry. He said no one really knows who wrote Easy Rider because it's just sort of this, you know, it's just part of the times. It's sort of, you know, it just
Buck Henry said
happened.
that?
You know, no, this was Buck Henry, yeah.
Yeah, but
And it's kind of true, but like things just don't happen, you know?
no,
There's
of
like,
course not.
you have to direct a film. You can't just have chaos. I mean, that would just be a rotten film. So, you know, this was a work, you know. I mean, there's a lot of collaboration too, you know. I mean, Fonda's terrific in it, and, you know, Jack really, like, wow, you never seen anything like that before when Jack shows up. But, you know, Dennis is a director, and he should be credited as such, you know, directed that movie, so.
This is not a question, but I was 14 when I saw it. I snuck into the theater to see it. And that just changed my mind. It changed my mind, changed my life. And my mind.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing...
Then he went out and got
But-
a big doobie.
Yeah, I started smoking. No. But I thought Dennis's character was a goofball, but I loved him. He was such a warm character. I loved it.
Yeah,
Even though it freaked me out the way he was acting, because I'd never seen
Yeah.
anybody act like that before.
yeah,
And I knew Peter from all the biker films and, you know, with Nancy Sinatra.
yeah,
But, yeah, it definitely changed me a lot.
yeah,
I always tell her that.
yeah. And then,
Blew my mind, man.
Blew my mind, yeah.
Can you talk about some of the films he directed, like one of my favorites, Hot Spot, some of the others, because he's just a fantastic director. He just makes
yeah.
some great films.
I mean, sort of like what I think is pretty underappreciated is and it's sort of getting like a bit of a comeback is Out of the Blue.
Oh, yeah.
There's sort of been some screenings, and I think there was one over here not too long ago. But that's great. It's great. It's really it's almost like veering on. It's not quite black comedy. It's just punk. It's like a punk movie. And then there's Colors is like a great Hollywood film. And he makes that in '88. I mean, talking about having a finger on the pulse. I mean, he makes Colors about the LA gang scene like 3 years before Boys in the Hood comes out, and those slew of movies. It's really, I don't know, I think it's a good film festival. It's pretty valuable, just as like, it's got a real documentary feel, I think, of like, she just knew sort of what was happening. And then there's always the last movie, which is like sort of up for endless debate, but what I think is kind of interesting is like, I think it's really due like a solid re-release, just so people could see it, just because there's such a great story behind it, and also like let people judge. And I think a lot of people now are like more used, that Tarantino, they're just used to like choppier narratives that can kind of go this way and that. And someone was saying that, well, like, I was talking to one of the editors of the last movie. This is a guy who, in fact, Dennis had told right before they were gonna, lock the print and that. He said, well, I got a vision. I want you to take the last 10 minutes, lop it off, and put it on the beginning. So I talked to the guy who made that cut out in deepest New Mexico, because he's certainly not hired by Hollywood after a cut like that. He was saying you got to see the last movie like on a big screen. You got to see it. You can't just like, I've seen it on YouTube, like this little thing. And
you
it's
gotta
just
see
like
the big screen.
you got to see it like a big screen, like a good print. You'll be like, wow, this is, because the footage is like, it's sort of beautiful stuff. And it takes it's getting used to, but it's an art film, and it takes multiple. You got to watch it a couple times, and if you're willing to sit there, it can be a little brutal, but like there's some treasures in there. I've actually come to really love it, but that's just me. But yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely kind of due a looking at again.
I think it's brilliant.
I don't know if it's. I mean, I think to me, I think it's like what it represents is sort of genius. It's this idea that Dennis wanted to make this great American art movie, and and he took it all the way to the bitter end.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it when there was the film festival they had for him right after he died.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I ever saw it. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing.
Is the version released now his version? The version that Universal released?
Well, there's one version that was like, from what I gather, like the Universal release version. They also cut it up and they made it into some film called like Chincheros. They made it into like a love story. So I think that's sort of been out, but like there isn't really like Criterion or someone needs to put out like the version because it's still like they're like, oh, it's like there's like Dennis had a print that's sort of the one that's shown around. When there's a film festival or something, I mean, they would call Dennis's, and just say, yeah, we want to watch that. So that's sort of the print that's been on the art house circuit. But it'd be kind of amazing if it could get out again.
It's another good movie. He didn't direct it. Tracks. Henry directed it. It's a great movie, the original one, before they issued it. It's so raw and so awesome.
Yeah.
It's just so, you really get to understand Dennis in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like Philippe and I talked about this, where he told me about it rather. I mean, it was, this idea of just like Dennis's like lost years of the 70s. I mean, okay, but then he does, he's doing, he did Mad Dog Morgan, he did Tracks, and then he shows up in Apocalypse Now and just kills it.
Oh, amazing.
I mean, you kidding? I mean, you don't see anything like that, like, ever. I mean, that's my favorite, personally, my favorite Dennis Hopper moment is like when he shows up in Apocalypse Now and it's just like dangerous. Like, wow, where's this, what is this coming from?
That's very interesting because he's playing Errol Flynn's son.
Yeah. Oh, right, because he plays, the photojournalist. Yeah.
Photojournalist?
Now, there's all these connections. You just like, I've spent lots of times thinking about, even to this time, I was like reading this story about like the journalist is riding down Hopper, and like, that's me, man. I'm that journalist. Like, I'm stuck in the truck with Hopper. He's telling me that story. That's it. Like, it's great. Like I don't know. I just think there's certain people. I mean, I didn't want to deify the guy. I mean, like, I've got my feelings on him, but like, there's just, you can't deny that he tapped into something, and so I try to approach it from, a little bit of a detective story angle too. Like, what is up with this guy? What, because he was, wow, so, it took me, like, I was supposed to be done with this book in a year.
Yeah.
It took me 3. I mean, I know that a lot of people say, well, it took me 10 years to write my book about the Norman conquest, that kind of thing. And I'm like, God, but like, I was writing this thing, like, I was like under the gun, like, for like forever, trying to like figure this stuff out and make it like semi-coherent. So let's hope so, which you might read, the contrary. But yeah, it was. I mean, I never got tired of it. I mean, I was always like, I was continually fascinated by sort of his story, and I think that's really why. I don't know. Like I said, I didn't want to do a Hollywood biography, and when you think about someone like Dennis, I mean, it's not like you're doing, Brando and the doorstop Brando. I mean, okay,
Right.
Brando probably deserves a doorstop, and he's Marlon Brando, or he's like. He's not that leading man, sort of Paul Newman, but he's something else, and that's why I just thought his his story is like, I thought it would just be a good book. I mean, I always saw him as sort of like a Don Quixote character, so I thought it was like a literary story, and I was like, this would be a good book.
True adventure.
Yeah, like this rambling journey through the American dream. So that's the book that I set out to write. I wasn't, because otherwise it's just, it would be a mismatch or something, He's not like William F. Buckley, It's, he's not like,
Or Cliff Rock. Montgomery Cliff.
yeah, I don't know.
No, I love Montgomery Cliff.
But this has been pretty cool. I'm glad. I have to thank all of you who've been part of the book, because it's one of the treats of doing this. Was getting to meet all you guys, and it's been a pretty special book for me to do. So I'm very happy with it.
Thank you.